Good morning and welcome to Radio Maria Ireland. Father Eamonn with you here this Wednesday morning, the 10th of November. Shout out to everybody now on Facebook and YouTube. Nice to have your company as well visually. And just apologies for the late start. I was running late from the get-go this morning. I was on a hiding to nothing really, trying to get myself organised. So a little bit late to the mic today, but nice to be here just nonetheless and to be with you on this feast day of Pope Saint Leo the Great. And if you want to have a great saint, or you want to have a benchmark for a great saint or a great pope, I think Pope St. John Paul II will do fine. That'll set the standard of the bar for you there. Man, look at the writings and just the prolific output of Pope St. John Paul II. In all his teachings, pick any one of them. What's the lovely document he wrote on life, Evangelium Vitae? Extraordinary document indeed on the sanctity of life, the good news of life. Well worth intense study. Not to mention all of the other massive encyclicals, Redemptoris Mater, and of course Theology of the Body, his Chatechesis over so many weeks. Extraordinary teacher, extraordinary evangelist and media personality in his own way, well able to stand in front of a camera, well able to play to the crowd, as it were, and play his part in his role, but never drawing attention to himself. Really, it was all about Christ and the Church, and certainly well able to speak his mind when it came to matters concerning faith and morality. Would be quite firm, and condemned capitalism and its excesses in as much as he also condemned communism. Didn't see capitalism as necessarily the solution, except in the measure that it served the poor and served the needy. Communism, again, he lived under that yoke for so many years and knew well how that became a dictatorship, and would equally be vocal about that. And through his influences, and of course the likes of Lech Wałęsa and so many other figures, the Solidarity movement, brought about a toppling, really, of the regime in Poland. And that was seen in its own way as an answer to, something foretold, I suppose, in its own way in relation to Our Lady Fatima, and the assassination attempt, of course, on him. Anyway, that's a big, whole long story. Pope St. John Paul the Great, eventually, and certainly Doctor of the Church. It seems to me, anyway, a no-brainer why he wouldn't rank among those. So when we speak of Pope St. Leo the Great, Doctor of the Church, we're dealing with a man of similar outstanding capacity and ability and inspiration and of holiness. And when we had the gospel this morning, the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church, and the keys of the kingdom granted to Peter. What else are those keys but the authority that Christ bestows? He is Petros, petrified. Have you ever heard of that idea? The rock on which Christ has built his church. It's simply so clear in the Gospels. This is what Christ intended. So all those who would, suggest that the Catholic Church is wrong and that the whole papacy is a human endeavour are simply misconstruing and misinterpreting and misdirecting. That somehow the Catholic Church is the enemy of Christianity. You hear all these kinds of notions. It's grossly unfair. It's simply not acknowledging tradition or history, or indeed Christ himself, quite literally there in the Gospels. When you're given keys, you're in charge. For better or worse, you might want to have the weight of those keys. I'm always so glad when I'm leaving a parish to hand the keys back. Be handing the keys of Radio Maria back one of the days too, who knows when, but that responsibility that accompanies, that's really the symbolism of it, not so much the keys themselves. It's a weighty burden. It's a weighty burden, and it's not a responsibility that anyone should necessarily be rushing forward to lay claim to. And this idea that, again, as priests we'd be ambling, or what's the word? Angling maybe is the word, for power. I mentioned before, I used to get that in school, look at the power the priest has. And I said, what power? What are you talking about? And I said, just, talk to me here and engage with me. Look at my role. These were children. I was teaching the secondary school, and I was a curate in the parish. I said, what power do you think I have? None, zero, diddly squat whatsoever. They had this, incredible notion. A priest simply has a role as a servant. That's what minister means, to serve. And anything that's there, the parish house, the parish church, all the things that the keys open don't belong to him, didn't belong to me, were there before I came, are there since I've left. None of that. It's absolutely not a power trip in any shape. If it is, then sorry, priest is on the wrong path. That's maybe clericalism, they call that sometimes, a reversion of it. Not a healthy thing at all, and better to maybe shun or certainly not wish these things. Again, just the responsibility that accompanies it and the judgment that accompanies that too is no small deal. It's not a small deal. So Pope Leo the Great, 461, probably born in Rome, of Tuscan parentage, and there's no record of his early life apparently. But he was a deacon under Celestine I and Sixtus III, the popes of course as well, and corresponded at one point with St. Cyril of Alexandria, and for a treatise known for his treatise of St. John Cassian on the Incarnation, to be dedicated to him. So he must have been a man of some education and some little renown at least. And he was employed as a peacemaker between two generals whose differences endangered the safety of Gaul from the barbarians. So you had the barbarians and the Huns and the Vandals were all marching around seeking the ruin of kingdoms in his day. So listen, if you think, we have problems today, again, to keep reminding you of that, not to look through the lenses of the past with rose-tinted glasses. They had their troubles, they had their difficulties. Leo was still in Gaul when messengers arrived in the year 440 to tell him that he'd been elected Bishop of Rome. And imagine receiving that news, and could you not say, well, thanks, but no thanks. Leo's 20 years pontificate was important in several ways. His statement of the doctrine of the Incarnation of Christ, acclaimed at the Council of Chalcedon, 451, has often been regarded as one of the highlights of Christian history. Jesus is fully God and fully man, and that incarnation, meaning God became flesh, the Word became flesh, and so that's built into our creed and our teaching. He also acted energetically to free Rome from the power of the barbarians, to restore the spiritual and material damage that they perpetrated. And in his writings and actions shone a deep conviction that the doctrinal primacy of Rome was of divine and scriptural authority. And throughout his pontificate he consolidated and increased the influence and prestige of the papacy. And that's what leaders seek to do. Again, not for any self-aggrandizement, but to establish the authority that Christ has given. And that's simply the only authority that we, certainly as priests or anyone in ordained ministry, deacons too, bishops likewise, the authority comes from Christ and from nowhere else. It's not ours. I don't deserve it. I'm not worthy, singularly unworthy for any of these things. And that's a very important realization for priests to come to. We had our little gathering of the clergy of my diocese there, just finishing today. Actually, I was there just for yesterday. But that was one of the themes that was brought up, and it's good that we be reminded of that it is Christ who is at the centre of our priesthood, and we would do well to continue on that humble path, knowing that of our own efforts and of our own energies and of our own even talents, we cannot do this, and we are not worthy. It's so important to keep fixed on Christ in the midst of all. So it's good to be reminded of these things. There's 143 letters that Pope St. Leo still survive, although less numerous than that of Gregory the Great, another great Pope as well. We know Gregorian chant and all of that association. But they reveal a similar care for the Church in Spain, in Gaul, that's France of course, and Africa. So again, the same concerns for the church in the world, and the same challenges, probably a lot more difficult in some ways. In different places, the errors of Manichaeism, Priscillianism, Pelagianism reappeared and required vigilant and determined treatment. Again, keep that in mind. The heresies of old, and they're still around today, share them in different guises and different forms, as modernism and humanism and neo this, that and the other nowadays. Back in the day, and they're just new forms of much the same type of doctrinal falsity. And from these heresies comes the solidification and the incorporation into teaching and tradition of truth, doctrinal truth, against these various heresies. Manichaeism, I think, sought to convince that the body was bad and the spirit was good. The body was just prone to evil. So it was a kind of a dichotomy, where that's not the case. The body is good. It's how we use it. It's the will that fails, if you like. I'm not sure what Priscillianism, I'd have to look that up. And Pelagianism, as I understand, to do with Christ again, his divinity. And Arianism is related, I think, too. I must sit down, actually, we should probably do a program or two on the heresies so that we understand exactly what they are. I need a good historian to get me going on that. It's definitely not my strong point, but certainly worthy, I would say. I should pick one maybe for a Chatechesis like this and just study it up and share with you where exactly this teaching was coming from, and then where the solid doctrine emerges then from that. So on occasion then, Pope Leo had to reassert the ancient tradition whereby bishops had a right of appeal to Rome. He found that St. Hilary apparently had exceeded his powers as metropolitan, and so Leo overruled some of his decisions. That's interesting. It doesn't give me detail now as to exactly what that was about. And I'm sure if Hilary was Saint Hilary, then no doubt there was meekness and humility in accepting that too. Again, another story that is just, it's only a sentence here, my little book, so there's a lot more to it, I'm sure. In all his guidance and intervention, Pope Leo was conscious of his authority, or rather that of Peter in his successors. So his patron association again with that, the authority as coming from Christ. Very important. That it wasn't just him establishing himself as a kind of dictator. You certainly wouldn't be canonized for that, for sure. His political importance, of course, and the churches he has had, not a direct political influence, more so than a diplomatic one, I would say. So in 452, Attila, with the Huns, sacked Milan and caused terror by his violence far and wide. He moved against Rome and was met by Leo, who persuaded him to accept tribute instead of sacking Rome. And that was some negotiation. And later the Vandal Genseric came with a large army. Again, Leo went out to meet him, and this time Rome was almost without defence. But although Leo again tried to save the city, it was plundered for 14 days. That must have been awful, heart-wrenching, and no doubt violent hands, really. Many captives were taken to Africa, but some ecclesiastical treasures were restored. Leo sent priests and alms to the captives and to Sicily. Gosh, imagine the wreckage after that takeover. The greatest triumph of his life was the acceptance of his dogmatic letter or tome at the Council of Chalcedon. As in his other writings, so in this one he showed remarkable clarity of thought and felicity of wording. Jesus Christ, he taught, is one person, the divine Word, in whom the two natures, human and divine, are permanently united without confusion or mixture. Again, that has to be declared as a doctrine at some point, because it's far beyond our ken, far beyond our understanding. What does it mean? We have enough trouble trying to figure out what it is to be human with the kind of Trinitarian sense of mind, body and spirit. You know, you can, or intellect, what is it? Intellect and will and understanding, is that the three kind of Trinitarian element of our nature. we struggle with that alone in understanding ourselves. How are we to begin to understand what it means to be both divine and human in one person? So it has to be declared as a doctrine and understood as such. It, again, all the heretical positions sought to either water that down or twist it out of shape. So that's why we need solid doctrinal teaching. And that's why we have the creed to consolidate and just fix that teaching very firmly. And so we do well to pay attention to the creed that we recite every Sunday, and solemnity too, because this is the hardcore, if you like, elements of the doctrinal content of our faith. Which is why in very important occasions we recite the creed, such as when a priest actually is making his profession of faith for a diaconate to take holy orders or priesthood. That creed is recited once again before the letter is signed, that I believe all that the church teaches. It's very formal and so very important. And again, we promise to uphold that teaching, defend it as well. So very good. Let me see. Yes, two natures, without confusion or mixture. When the council heard this document read by Leo's legates, they cried, "Peter has spoken by Leo." So he, in his leadership, very firm, solid teaching. It became thenceforth the official teaching of the Christian Church, but the same council enhanced the status of the See of Constantinople, and in spite of the legates' protests, made it a patriarchate, mainly for political reasons. So here, as with the fall of Rome to the barbarians, Leo's success was somewhat mixed. Again, how that was to unfold in time. Again, I wouldn't like to use the word failure there as such. The Holy Spirit works with all these things too, but his success was mixed, let's say. Leo's character is described as one of indomitable energy, sounds like Pope St. John Paul II, magnanimity, consistency, and devotion to duty. Again, Pope St. John Paul. Again, if you want a kind of a benchmark, again, if you want to have a standard to understand what it means to be declared a great Pope and a doctor of the Church, we have one within our own lifetime as well, So there we are. Let's see. His principal writings to survive are 96 sermons and letters, and declared a doctor of the Church in 1754, centuries after. I hope we're not waiting centuries for Pope St. John Paul to be declared a doctor either. These things come in the fullness of time, I suppose. Anyway, St. Leo the Great, there you are. There's a couple of other Leos. Leo the Third, Leo the Ninth are canonized saints as well. So the Lord provides these great witnesses to the Church. And if you're listening to Father Billy earlier on, he was saying, look, this month we celebrated all saints of the Church and all the saints of Ireland. And what's needed today is the very same. Things don't change, really. Conditions and circumstances and, life, I suppose, just the way the world works changes a little bit, let's say. But human nature being what it is, you could also say, well, nothing changes. Plus ça change, is it? Plus même chose, something like that in French. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And history has a way, like they say, of repeating itself. We see, history turning around now, and we're seeing a collapse, really, of morality in the West, and a rise of the Church in Africa, particularly Latin America, not without its problems. Countries like Vietnam, there's a swathe of vocations coming through, rising really out of the blood of many martyrs and terrible persecution and violence and conflict and poverty. God works in extraordinary ways and will rebuild his Church out of these great crucibles of suffering. And we see it, again, turn back the pages of history and just stand back a bit when you see it here in Ireland, the very same. A terrible crucible of suffering for several hundred years of persecution, and from that deep faith, sorely tried, but from that again the seeds of the blood of the martyrs, and a new and vibrant Church, a new springtime bursting forth around the time of the famine here in Ireland and right through the last century. And in a way, we're resting on some of that legacy, I would say, here in Ireland. And again, as scratch under the surface, faith isn't that very far away. Several priests now yesterday at our conference, they were describing, and like we grapple with these questions, and it's good. We come together and we compare notes. And several of them now said how it was very heartening that every student, with rare exception, I think, every student came for a belated celebration of confirmation and belated celebration of First Communion. Again, because of the lockdown and COVID restrictions and so on, all these sacramental celebrations were postponed. And so your boys and girls in second class or third class maybe, or gone into secondary school and coming back in full and in force for the celebration of the sacraments. Not that, as was commented, they would necessarily return on the Sunday the following day if it was celebrated on Saturday to come for a Holy Mass, but something is there. Something is deep embedded in the Irish psyche still, in the Irish spirit, in the soul. It is there. So the question, the abiding question, this synod that's coming, we're chatting about that. Synod meaning like syncretism coming together, and hodos, I think is the Greek word, on the way. So journeying together, on pilgrims on the way, pilgrims on the journey. The synod is not a big meeting. It's a dialogue. Again, very like Radio Maria. It's an ongoing dialogue. The road to Emmaus is the model. That there they were downcast, heading out of Jerusalem, talking about everything that happened and just what now. And it wasn't until the breaking of bread, excuse me, in the upper room, or with when they stopped for supper, that their eyes were opened in the Holy Eucharist. They recognized Christ about face, and they headed right back to Jerusalem and the others. Synod is the same path, the same journey, talking with each other along the road, welcoming Christ into the midst, hearing what he has to say, hearing what one another has to say, and how we're impacted and affected by what's happening in the world today. It's not a Vatican III, it's not meant to be that. It's meant to be a dialogue with a lot of listening going on, and opening ourselves up to all of the difficult questions of our time, and allowing people to speak and to come forth, not as an invitation to change doctrine by popularity. It's not a voting exercise, because that's not how the church operates at all. It's not a democracy of any shape, size, description, where the majority says, well, we should change church teaching on X, Y, Z. That's simply, no, it's preserving what's been handed on to us, and with the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and the authority of the church, but applying it or reapplying it to what's happening today, and to do that in an openness and a prayerfulness, and inviting the light of the Holy Spirit, and especially that Christ be at the center of this conversation. Again, here on Radio Maria, I feel this is we're just right in the middle of this synodal path. We're part of that conversation. We're a new means of evangelization, and we're already chatting with you and speaking with you and journeying with you and hearing you and sharing again the sorrows, the struggles, the burdens, but also the joys and the blessings, and hopefully proving to be a hub of sorts, or an outlet or a means to communicate more of what the work of the Holy Spirit is doing in our church to all of you. So we're part of that synodal way. And so Pope St. Leo, I'm sure, if he was around, he'd be happy to come to the microphone and again join in the synod. We're all very much a part of this journey. So that was an interesting conversation to have. It's a long-term thing, but again, what they said there, there was a Father Eamonn Fitzgibbon from Limerick was chatting with us, just giving a little presentation, helping us understand it. They had a synod in Limerick some years ago, I think 2015, I think it was, before the synodal pathway was introduced, this idea. And very interesting. And they had, they learned from how they approach things. And one of the things he said was to try to manage expectations. So the one thing they said, he's on the committee now for the National Conference of Bishops in guiding the whole exercise. And one of the things they're seeking to avoid was anything that would harp back to, say, something like the Eucharistic Congress in 2012, the launch of the new Missal in 2014, or the World Meeting of Families 2018, that it's not kind of leading up to a big crescendo and then it all sort of the wave sort of dissipates again. That's not the model, that's not the idea. It's certainly local meetings and conversations in parish communities and in diocesan communities, and feeding into the National Conference of Bishops. But as that wave sort of moves in one direction, again, it's happening in Rome and in the church at large, but that wave comes back again and flows back to its origin, if you like, which is again back to the grassroots, back into the church, back into the community. And it will mean, examining very honestly and openly and maybe even painfully at times, how are we doing? How are you doing? What's happening in your community? Is the model that we're operating on sustainable by way of the traditional model of priests in parishes and the priest with the keys of the kingdom and kind of managing things a little bit? Or is there a new approach needed? The shape and structure of parish life and community life, the involvement of the people of the parish. I can see it happening here, lovely around me here in the radio, that it's just a marvel enabler here, that you who are listening, you are involved with the radio, are instrumental in helping this work continue. And indeed the noble staff we have around us here likewise, and all the volunteers who come in, that I'm just here holding the keys, as it were, that idea of the that office, but certainly not seeking to command or control or steer things in, according to my own disposition. Yes, to keep things on the path of the sound teaching of the church, in union and communion with the voice of the church, faithful to her teaching, but somehow steering the ship, as it were, through the troubled waters of what's happening around us today. But with all of it, nothing could happen without all of your help and all of your support and all of your involvement. So it's not a power trip, it's not a power struggle. Again, that question that will arise necessarily is authority in the church and the role of women in the church, for example. All these hot button issues like married priests and women priests and all these other things. Yes, sure, allow those things to come to the surface, but let's look at what the church is teaching and has taught so consistently, and to see how is the faith being communicated and shared and passed on today. It's not about authority, or it's not about any discrimination against anyone. That in fact it's the royal priesthood of the laity, the lay faithful, that is instrumental in the life of the church. Always has been. The priest is simply there as a servant. It's not about us. It's about and this is what I say, the beauty of Radio Maria and the Marian influence and all of your involvement in the life of the church. So important. So if we can begin to understand that as part of the synodal conversation and this pathway, because again, it's, as I say, it's not leading up to a big crescendo and a big meeting and a big gathering, say in Croke Park or in where have they been before, in Ballsbridge, say in the RDS, or in Knock, for example. Again, that would probably lead to false expectations. So Father Eamonn was saying that, Father Eamonn Fitzgibbon, to manage expectations from the outset. And it's a false expectation if this is going to lead up to some monumental decision-making exercise, excuse me, where we're going to change everything and kind of wash the old stuff away, and let's all introduce all these new ideas. That's the false understanding that's been applied to the Second Vatican Council in the past too, which again proved fatal after the Council, as we've also learned, because how many things just went off the rails in terms of liberal tendencies in all directions. And there was a huge fall away from priesthood and religious life following the Second Vatican Council, based probably on false expectations and on false interpretations afterwards. It was never meant to be interpreted in that way, that it was just time to sort of loosen everything and go whichever way you will. And again, there are those who would argue that the liturgy perhaps suffered as a result of that. And you can argue that even still today. What about our liturgical practice? That should be a key element of our conversation. But again, if Jesus, if Christ is not at the heart of that, if he's not walking with us on the road to Emmaus, then all our conversation is in vain. If it's all about, management and maintenance, these are the kind of two buzzwords. If we're just managing this, keeping the status quo going, and managing the buildings and managing, to keep the sacramental life going, maintaining, the timetable of all the various different sacramental elements. All of that is so important and is so necessary. But if it's only about that, and that would lead the conversation into the realm of sort of authority and who's in charge and who decides and all these things, instead of flipping that on its head and saying, well, like, hang on, it's about service, and that what should probably get greater priority, maybe the highest priority, is mission, because if there's a mission and outreach in some way to the lapsed and the marginalised, the disenfranchised and the hurt and the various community groups and so on, if we're not engaged somehow in the mission of the church, all the management and maintenance is only deck chairs on the Titanic, that description that the ship is sinking and you rearrange the deck chairs. It's pointless exercise. And I think, and here's my view and my experience as a priest so far, that where there is mission, where there's determined reaching out in the way of growth and trying to encourage others in the faith and sharing the faith and every which way of doing that's possible, all the other things fall into their place. The maintenance and the management find their proper perspective and order. So again, on Radio Maria, I'm seeing that model. I hope this is certainly our goal, is pushing out all the time as we go promoting our adoration. There's some souls who come in kindly today to kind of re-engage with our adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. Again, pushing all the time, expanding the work of our radio, getting more to listen in, more content. It's a constant sleeves rolled up journey. This to me is where synodality will come to its true expression, that it won't just be another discussion network or a talk shop. I've had many of those in the past, and they can be so frustrating. We talk about talks, and we keep talking, and in the sense that if we're talking, then we're somehow achieving something. Whereas there isn't something that's somehow also action-based. This is where Frank Duff is a legend. He comes completely into his own. He devised a system where the meeting is every week. Yes, there's conversation at the meeting, but it's animated by the work. There's work is allocated every week. There's action, there's activity, there's apostolate, there's mission, all the while. And it's the lay people who gather around the priest, and with Our Lady present, it's real Acts of the Apostles stuff. And it's sending them out in pairs to the corners of the parish and knocking on doors and initiatives of all kinds to draw people in. And where that mission is alive, there's growth going on. The Spirit can move, the grace can flow. So if it's just a talk shop, I'm not really interested. Thanks all the same. And I hope Radio Maria isn't just that either. It's my certain hope that this isn't just idle radio conversation, talking heads, as they say. We, as you know, we seek to engage with you, and we want you to engage with us, and then you then in turn to go out to the world, tell others, draw them in, share this in this work. There's something very uplifting and very fulfilling about all of that. So Pope Leo the Great, he did the very same. He went off to meet the Huns and the barbarians, and he didn't, the Vandals, and he succeeded in keeping the Huns at bay, but didn't succeed with the Vandals. That didn't stop him from going to dialogue with these people and try to bring them to faith, maybe too. Good. My time is up. Sorry about the shortness of the slot today. I left out the music deliberately so that we could just have a good run at the conversation. I'll be back with you, please God, for Chatechesis again tomorrow morning. Please do stay with us. We're going to switch off the camera now, but please do